The Bronze Age falls between the Stone Age, which is more specifically known as the Neolithic period, which is when we had the first farmers, and the Iron Age, which was dominated by, you guessed it, the use of iron. In Britain, the Bronze Age began in roughly 2000 BC. That's 4,000 years ago. And it ended in about 800 BC, when the use of bronze began to decline and iron became the hot new technology.
It's very difficult to capture how important or big a deal the introduction of metal would have been to people living in Britain around 2500 BC, because today we're surrounded by metal. It's everywhere. It's in the buildings we live in, it's in the cars we drive. We have to try to imagine a world where nobody has seen metal, nobody has seen the magic of transforming an object into other objects.
The Bronze Age is characterized by the use of bronze and copper. And no one had seen technology like this before in Britain. Melting tin and copper with fire in a process called smelting, people could now produce tools that would better shape their environment.
Flint and stone has very different properties to metal. You can't recycle it and reuse it in the same way. Once you've made a flint axe, you can only make it smaller. You can't melt it down and start again. So metal represents all sorts of new possibilities for what people can do with their raw material.
Tin and copper melt at relatively low temperatures, and once liquid, the metal can be poured into a mold to create things like axe heads, swords, daggers, arrows, and more.
And what I have here are some examples from that hoard. And there's a very rare example of a stone mould from the hoard, which would have been used to make one of the bronze axes that were fundamental to life during the Bronze Age for cutting down trees and for building houses. And we have both the mould and the axe that would have been produced in that mould. And this is an example of a late Bronze Age axe, which the people who were feasting and partying at Runnymede would have been very familiar with. It would have been their basic tool of survival during that period for all sorts of activities.
The Bronze Age is not all about bronze, despite the name. In fact, pottery became a lot more distinct, and people began to, instead of wearing animal hides, weave their own clothes. The Bronze Age was a period of new technologies. Instead of working with the environment like the hunter-gatherers who'd come before, Bronze Age people were more rapidly changing and shaping their environment to suit their needs.
I think probably the modern analogy for the introduction of metal is the introduction of something like the internet. It completely changes how people relate to one another, and it provides all sorts of new ways of being sociable and of being human.
Large forest areas were cleared to provide land to farm and to build homes. Populations grew, and for the first time people began living in larger communities. But these developments came at a price. Life in the Bronze Age was arguably harder than it had ever been before.